Iran and the United States set to hold talks in Islamabad. Donald Trump claims victory while Iran asserts its own gains. Israeli strikes in Lebanon spark ceasefire violation accusations. What can we expect from the upcoming negotiations in Pakistan?
Hello, I am Ellie Richardson and you are watching another episode of Explained. The geopolitical landscape underwent a seismic shift yesterday with the formal announcement of a 2-week cessation of hostilities between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. The diplomatic reprieve, brokered following 39 days of direct military engagement, aims to provide a window for high-level negotiations in Pakistan. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, as acting as a primary intermediary, has characterized the truce as a triumph of proactive diplomacy, framing Islamabad as a critical neutral ground for regional stabilization. However, the foundations of this ceasefire remain tenuous. President Donald Trump, in a series of formal communications, asserted that the suspension of military operations was contingent upon Tehran's compliance with a rigorous 10-point de-escalation framework. While confirming the pause, the U.S. executive branch emphasized that American military assets remain in a state of high readiness in the Persian Gulf to enforce the real agreement currently under pursuit. Conversely, Indian leadership has presented the development as a strategic repositioning, claiming that the resilience of their defense infrastructure compelled a shift from conflict to diplomatic engagement. As the focus shifts from the theatre of war to the halls of diplomacy, the composition of the negotiating teams reveals the high stakes of the upcoming summit. The scheduled negotiations in Islamabad represent the most significant diplomatic encounter between Washington and Tehran in decades. According to reports, the Iranian delegation is led by Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament and a high-ranking political strategist with significant influence within the country's security apparatus. He is reportedly said to be accompanied by Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Of particular importance is the US decision to appoint Vice President J.D. Vance as the lead negotiator. The Vice President's involvement signifies that the administration views these talks not merely as a temporary de-escalation, but as a definitive mission to restructure the regional security architecture. Vance's presence, representing the highest level of US executive authority to engage with Iran in recent history, is intended to demonstrate resolve regarding 2 non-negotiable American objectives: the total verified removal of Iran's enriched uranium stockpiles and the permanent, unimpeded operation of the Strait of Hormuz. Let's listen in to what the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said about these talks.
Announced that the president is dispatching his negotiating team, led by the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, Special Envoy Witkoff, and Mr. Kushner to Islamabad for talks this weekend. The first round of those talks will take place on Saturday morning local time, and we look forward to those in-person meetings.
The momentum of peace is currently threatened by a sharp escalation in peripheral conflict zones, exposing deep fissures in the interpretation of the truce. The integrity of the 2-week truce is already being questioned due to a sharp escalation of violence in Lebanon. Over the past 24 hours, Israeli forces have conducted intensive aerial bombardments across Beirut and the Bekaa Valley, resulting in significant casualties. This has exposed a critical divergence in the interpretation of the ceasefire's scope. Iranian and Pakistani officials have suggested that the understanding of the truce was comprehensive, implying a cessation of hostilities across all regional theatres. However, the United States and Israel have clarified that the current agreement is strictly bilateral between Washington and Tehran. Vice President Vance stated that the ceasefire does not extend to operations against Hezbollah, which Israel views as a separate and ongoing security necessity. This de-linked approach has drawn sharp criticism from international observers, including Spain's foreign ministry, which categorized the continued strikes as a violation of international law. The discrepancy poses a direct threat to the Islamabad summit, as Iran may find it politically untenable to negotiate while its principal regional ally remains under heavy assault. US Vice President J.D. Vance has said that Tehran's negotiations through the US-Iran ceasefire agreed including Lebanon, but the US has in fact not agreed to that. Vance has added that he thinks this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. Vance has also said that he thinks that the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. He has also mentioned that the US position was that the ceasefire would focus on Iran-US allies, including Israel and the Gulf Arab Emirates. Levitt also clarified the United States position. Listen in.
Is there any thought, though, that the President might like to see Lebanon included at a future date, given that it seems to be causing or potentially undermining the Iran ceasefire?
Again, this will continue to be discussed, I am sure, between the President and Prime Minister Netanyahu, the United States and Israel, and all of the parties involved. But at this point in time, they're not included in a ceasefire deal.
Behind the official narratives, a series of irregular diplomatic communications has introduced a layer of uncertainty regarding the arrival of the Iranian delegation. A notable instance of diplomatic uncertainty occurred earlier today, involving the Islamic Republic's embassy in Pakistan. Ambassador Reza Amiri issued a public statement via official social media channels confirming that the Iranian delegation was scheduled to arrive in Islamabad tonight to commence preliminary discussions. However, the post was subsequently deleted without a formal explanation, leading to intense speculation regarding the status of the delegation's transit. Reports suggest this retraction may reflect internal deliberations within Tehran concerning the viability of the talks in light of strikes in Lebanon, or perhaps a revised security protocol necessitated by the high-profile nature of the participants. While the Pakistani district administration has already declared 2 days of local holiday to facilitate the security of the visiting dignitaries, the removal of the ambassador's post underscores the fragile and volatile nature of the coordination efforts preceding the Saturday summit. With the clock ticking on a temporary reprieve, the international community now watches to see if these negotiations can prevent a return to full-scale war. The upcoming 48 hours will serve as a decisive litmus test for global stability. The Islamabad talks are tasked with resolving fundamental disputes that military force has failed to settle. The US administration is demanding an unprecedented level of transparency and the complete surrender of Iranian nuclear materials. What President Trump has termed nuclear dust, alongside permanent maritime guarantees, Iran in turn seeks the total recession of economic sanctions and a formal recognition of its sovereignty with the regional order. Should the negotiations fail to produce a verifiable framework for peace, the expiration of the 2-week ceasefire could trigger a renewed and potentially more destructive phase of the conflict. However, the significant decline in global energy prices and the reopening of the key diplomatic channels, such as the Spanish embassy in Tehran, suggest a cautious international optimism. That is all we have time for this episode of Explained. Stay tuned as we bring you more in-depth insights and stories that matter.